This is Trailer Park, the podcast trailer podcast. My name's Arielle Nissenblatt. On this show, we do a lot of different things. We play trailers and we analyze those trailers. We talk about podcasts. We talk about short form audio and now sometimes video. We get together to explore the art of what a podcast is, what it can be, and how to grow an audience, but also how to help people find their next favorite show. So this show is for people who listen to podcasts, who watch podcasts. It's also for people who make podcasts and want to reach those listeners and consumers. Today we have a cool special episode. Usually on this show, we play a trailer, analyze that trailer, and we've got a bunch of those coming up. But today we're going to set the scene for a bunch of those that are coming up. And actually, this episode is kind of going to prove the thesis of this whole show, because we have Jay Nachlis today, who is the VP and consultant at Coleman. And we're here to talk about a trailer study that Jay and I did with a few partners and what it showed, what it revealed about podcast trailers. So we're going to talk about research. We're going to talk about how to apply research. We're going to talk about this study that we put together, the partners that we had to put it together with, some of the trailers that we tested, some of the variables that went into those tests, and then what our findings are. Jay, welcome to the show. How are you today?
I am great. Thanks for having me, Arielle.
Excited to have you here. We've been working on this for a long time. Let's do a little background on who you are. What got you interested in research in the first place?
I was obsessed with, when I was growing up, I was obsessed with radio. I was obsessed with music on the radio. I listened to a lot of sports on the radio. I was a kid that used to call into talk shows when I was very, very young. And, you know, you find out when you meet other people that got into radio, they have many of these similar stories where, you know, they might be riding in the back of the station wagon when they're growing up and listening to Casey Kasem on the radio and then literally talking up the intros to songs and then doing it on cassettes and recording themselves. I did all of this stuff. And so it was almost like this predetermined, yes, I'm going to eventually get into radio. At the time, the radio industry didn't really have a lot of deep strategic research. It was more gut instinct, right? I have a feeling this is the song I should play because I like it. My friends like it. And so when I was on the radio side, I've been here in Raleigh for over 20 years. Coleman happened to be headquartered in Raleigh, and a job came open, and I ended up getting on the research side. And I always thought to myself, I thought it would be really cool if I eventually was not on the radio side anymore. It would be great to be on the research side, just because I found the process fascinating. How can we understand what people want, what they expect, both from us, but also from the competition, and use that, how they could create this strategic roadmap from Excel spreadsheets just was amazing to me. And so really the way this all pivoted then into where we are today is, you know, it's podcasting is still a relatively new medium, as you know, compared to radio, certainly, and television. It's still in, I think, a growth phase. And it's really exciting because a lot of the stuff that we're bringing to podcasting is stuff that isn't being done yet in podcasting. So part of my job has been making people aware of the type of research we do. It's different in radio because they understand who we are and what we do. So, I mean, you're talking about podcasting. I have to do brand awareness. I have to do product awareness. And then it's been kind of fun because I've also evolved in the way that I serve podcasters. So for example, in the beginning, it was, well, it's going to be all on that editorial side. It's going to be all on the content side. Well, I've understood that there's a real need on the monetization side too, some of which is being done, some isn't. And so now it's serving both, and that's been really a neat journey.
So different types of studies have emerged over the years, different client needs.
Right. The process of using a company like Coleman, a research study like ours, is really it has to start with kind of an issues call, is what we would call it, which is, tell me about what you're facing challenges-wise. What are your goals? You know, is it audience growth, retention, awareness? Do you think you have a marketing problem? Do you not know who your consumer is? Do you think you have a content problem? Do you think your talent is not focused or talking too much, right? Do you have a distribution problem? Whatever your issue might be, I'm going to listen and say, okay, how would research solve this? Right? And then I come back to you and I say, well, this is the methodology. And that's why 95% of the work we do is custom. We have some syndicated products, but most of it is custom. And it's specifically—
Because there's so many variables.
so many
Yeah.
variables. What does this client need in their situation, and how can that research help? And so sometimes it's, the two major types of research are quantitative and qualitative. Quantitative is more the what, qualitative is more the why, right? So qualitative tends to be smaller sample sizes, think focus groups, one-on-one interviews. That's qualitative research. Quantitative research are these bigger scale projects that you see that often have hundreds or even thousands of people, where you're surveying them on, what do you think of this? And then qualitative goes a bit deeper. Okay, we understand what you think of it. Now, why do you think that way?
Does it ever happen where something starts out quantitative and then you pull out certain people to go more into the qualitative?
Yeah, and actually it works both ways. Sometimes you can start qualitative. If you have the budget for both, it's actually awesome, because if you start qualitative first, you can uncover things that can inform the quantitative. So, imagine developing a quantitative survey. You have hypotheses. You have a pretty good idea of what you want to cover. But the great thing about doing that qualitative research is, always, no matter what, there's going to be things that come up where the person on the other side of the glass, or in that room, or on Zoom or Teams, will go, "Oh wow, I never thought of that before." And then you want to scale it. Okay, is that something that only a few people think, or is that something that almost everybody thinks? And that's what quantitative can answer. And then, yes, the other way works too, where sometimes you do the quantitative research and then something ends up being a bigger issue than you thought. And you say, well, I really need to know more about that. And then you pull some out into qualitative.
So before we get into the study, the trailer study that we did together, I want to ask about how smaller creators, independent creators, even smaller networks might be able to lean into the things that you find, but also maybe how to run their own studies, because I know that this can get expensive pretty quickly. What are some of the questions that you ask, or some of the principles that you dive into when you are setting up a research study that might be able to be applied to individual creators?
There are a couple blogs that I've written about this. If you go to colemaninsights.com and go to our blog page, you can look for some stuff on questionnaire development, because your point is a really good one. The fact that we've got so many tools for people to do self-service surveys is actually awesome, right? So whether you're talking about SurveyMonkey or Google and everything else, it's awesome that you can design it, but it's also, in a way, it undersells how difficult building a questionnaire really is. If you've taken everybody's taken a survey, right? Whether it be my grocery store sends me something, or my airline sends me something. Arielle, I can't tell you how many times I will go through a questionnaire, and it's tough because I'm too close to it. And so now I can't evaluate it I can't take it without evaluating it. And so I will take a survey, and inevitably there's something wrong every single time. Whether it be that it doesn't render correctly on my phone. A big problem in questionnaires is what we call skip logic, right? And skip logic is when you get to a point of the survey and it skips questions because it shouldn't go to everybody, right? If I answered this way, then I don't answer this question. I skip to this question. Skip patterns are one of the biggest things that if you do a self-service study, you miss. And what happens when you miss things like that, and people are taking questions they shouldn't, or you've designed the answer set, the key, incorrectly, right? There are all these little things that you can mess up that what happens is it pollutes the whole data set. That's the problem. So I would really caution and be careful and watch that. Look for some of those thoughts that we have in building it, check our blog for that. But the other part of that is, and what I've tried to do is understanding what you're talking about is most of the work we do is this kind of 360 full service thing where, I am going through that issues call, and then I'm the one that develops the whole questionnaire for you, right? And then I come back and do it with the analysis and everything. But I've recognized that there is a big need for just kind of assistance in this self-service way. In other words, when you're doing research, self-selecting research is not the best research. What I mean by that is if you can go out and find a target audience, if I'm a comedy podcast, if I can go out and find people that have interest in my comedy podcast, they may not be listeners yet, but they have interest in it, that's really valuable because I can find out how
A
I can
lookalike
grow.
audience.
A lookalike audience, right. And in most cases, most podcasters don't have the audience to be able to go out and naturally find listeners of them.
Right.
The bigger ones we can, but the smaller ones and most of them you can't. So how do they do their own research? As you've pointed out, they'll recruit on their own podcasts and then send them somewhere to take that survey. So I've started to kind of offer this lower level where I will help you. I'll take you through that and I'll listen and I'll design the survey for you. You're still recruiting it. You're still getting all the results. Well, we can host and program it, but it's kind of this lower level that you can still do it self-serve, but get some extra guidance that hopefully just makes it a better output. And then, can give you some additional findings on the back end, which is the other part of it, right? It's the interpretation. Is you may have this big data set that you get from SurveyMonkey, but then what do you do with it, which is important.
What are the actionable insights? What are you going to do differently now that you have this information? And I bet if I had to guess, like what goes on behind the scenes of the survey industry is you work with a client, they spent all this money, put this together, they have their insights, they don't make changes, and then they come back and they're like, ugh, it didn't even help. And you're like, okay, because you didn't implement any of the things that we told you to implement. Just a guess.
There are a cajillion examples like that, yes.
Just to backtrack a bit, because I want to make sure people who are listening understand what they can do today, speaking of actionable insights after listening to this. When you're talking about setting up the survey, the methodology behind it, the skip logic, all of that, I mean, I just put together a survey for the 9th anniversary of my podcast recommendation newsletter. And I put it together, just a few questions. I knew some things about surveying and how to make sure that you're not from the outset biasing the data or getting people to, I mean, one of the things is like, should something be a multiple choice or should it be a checkbox? And if there's a checkbox, do you then give the next question room for them to expand on it? There's so many different things that you can do. I accidentally, I'll just share like a mistake that I made is that I did 2 questions that were scales, so 1 to 5, but I accidentally made it so that the first one was like negative to positive, and then the one at the end was positive to negative. The more natural one is negative to positive. And so when people got to the second scale question, they answered it as if it was still negative to positive. And I think I got a lot of messed up data in that way. So I ended up not even counting it. And if people want to see what that looks like in action, I put out a post in one of my newsletters. I'll link to it in the show notes of the responses that I got and what I took away from it. And I only got 62 responses, but and they were self-selected, right? And, I was okay with the self-selecting nature of the people that replied because my thought was, you know what? Those are the people that raised their hand to be part of this community. So I'm going to make the assumption that they are a proxy for others in the community. They're definitely not a proxy for everyone. So listeners, readers, if you disagree with this outcome, raise your hand. If this pisses you off, come back in and give me your feedback. So that was a takeaway that I had. And I'm sure that if I were to run that by somebody who is, you'd be like, okay, here are the mistakes that you made and here's what you can learn from it. But I do encourage everybody to try to at least get some information from their listeners or from their readers, even if it's, hey, is anybody down for a 5-minute phone call where I ask you a few questions?
Yeah, and I totally welcome that phone call. And you're right. It's not to say, because we should do self-selecting research. Like, it's important to do both. You should understand, in radio, you'd call those P1 listeners, your first preference, right? The people that choose you first, your loyal consumers.
Got it.
You should know what they think, and you should also know what the casual ones think. And then you should know what the people that aren't consuming you think as well. But of course, it's important to know from your most loyal consumers what they think.
Yeah. Let's jump into this survey, the trailer study that we did. First, the way it came about is that I host this podcast. Jay, you knew that I host this podcast.
Yep.
You responded to an email that I put out where I mentioned the podcast and you said, let's get some data behind this. What were you thinking?
I was thinking that, as far as I knew, there wasn't a lot of research that existed on podcast trailers. And I felt like kind of asking around that there was this attitude of, do we need trailers? How effective are they? And it felt like if I could put together a study with you. What would this look like? And the two key things that I felt, well, I guess three key things. One was, what do people remember from them, and how does it drive intent? And then, of course, just a simple A/B test to start, like which of these do we prefer. If we were going to do a trailer test, I wanted to make sure we were doing it the right way and making the variables so that there was no confusion as to if you change too many things. If you're doing an A/B test and you change too many things, this goes back to what you were just talking about bad research versus good research. If you have a 60-second and a 30-second trailer, even if that's the difference, well, those are two different.
People might just get fatigued from the 60-second.
Yeah,
right?
we just don't know. Or, the voices are completely different and you've used different sound effects. Or the script is different and So the other thing was we really wanted to make sure we were only changing one variable. And then once we got Rachel from Nova Entertainment and Peter from Pantheon involved, in that discussion we ended up having about what the variables would be, that was fun. Like, to me, that was one of the signs early on that I felt like this was going to be a good study, because you guys were all in the right headspace of where we should be going.
Yeah, everybody understood the assignment, as we would say. Rachel Corbett from Nova, an Australian podcast production company, and Peter from Pantheon, based in the US. We found them. They were the right people. They were the right people because they were down to experiment. And also they understood that this is going to be good data for their own shows, but it's also going to have broader implications. And we're going to be able to present this data to creators, individual networks, large production companies who are going to use it to hopefully make some changes or feel validated that they're doing the quote unquote right thing for them. So what went into selecting participants for the study?
Well, you just mentioned one of those pieces, which is you have to be willing to go through this process and share it. And there are definitely clients that don't want to share their data publicly, particularly if you're talking about your own shows. And so the fact that they were willing to do that was important. They were intellectually curious. They really felt like this was the kind of information that could be valuable for everybody. So I thought that they were just, as you point out, I thought that the two of them were just a perfect match. I know that in the beginning, as I've pointed out, Rachel had some concerns about being Australian and the fact that those shows are in Australia with pretty thick Australian accents. She was concerned if you're doing a US study, how that would play. And it ended up being totally fine. But once we kind of got past that obstacle, they were just great participants for this.
Yeah. Then it was time to find the respondents for the survey. How does Coleman go about doing that?
Well, we have the advantage of, our parent company is a company called Quest Mindshare, and they're one of the world's largest data collection companies. So, we have panels all over the world, right? And so we can do research on anything, and we've expanded past radio and podcasting. But at the end of the day, no matter what that audience is, I can probably find them for you. If you were looking for women between the ages of 25 and 44 in Brooklyn that eat veggie burgers weekly, I could probably find that sample for
That's
you.
That's me. Did you know that?
I knew you lived in Brooklyn, so I was just...
And I'm a vegetarian.
Yeah, there you go.
Wow.
Hilarious. So in this case, we have something in... I'll get a little wonky here for a second.
Please.
We have something in podcasting called, or non-podcasting, we have something in research called incidence rate. Incidence rate is the percentage of people within a target population that we think that we can reach. The lower incidence rate, the harder it is to recruit. It becomes more expensive, and sometimes we just have to say no, right? So if you ask me to do a study of podcast consumers, that's easy. Enough of the population consumes podcasts. Are we looking for men, women, or both? What age group are we looking at? Are we looking at a category segment? Or, and then it goes down from there. But if you're looking at a general podcast consumer population like this, very easy to do. So we have panels we can go to. We find the target market, the age group. You have to consume podcasts at least a few times in a typical week. If they qualify, they would be invited to take the survey.
So we found 500 people, and they also had to identify as listening to podcasts. They could also watch podcasts, but they had to also be listeners, right?
Yes, because we were evaluating audio
Right.
podcasts and not doing anything with video. You could be audio only, you could be audio video, but you couldn't be video only.
So that sets the scene. Then we surveyed them. What were some of the questions that we asked?
First of all, we played these different versions of trailers. So there were 4 different shows: High Scrollers, Better Than Yesterday, Binge or Cringe, and Superfan Diaries.
Good job.
Yeah,
Off the dome.
right off the top, right? As I started that sentence, I was like, man, I hope I don't screw
Land
this
the
up.
plane.
Yeah. So we had 4 different podcasts, 8 different trailers, 2 per show. And then we had the different variables that we tested. And so what happened, for the way that it worked for consumers as they were taking the survey, is it was, here's this show. You're going to listen to 2 versions of the show. We didn't tell them anything about what we were trying to get at. So for them, as they're taking the survey, they're literally just listening to it. It's not, this one is AI,
Right.
this one is authentic voice, right? All they're doing is listening.
Just listen.
Yep. They're both 60 seconds. And so what they would do is they would listen to one, listen to the other, and then we say, choose your favorite. They choose their favorite. Of their favorite, then we say, what do you remember from it? And they could remember anything. And that, to us, right, was one of the most fascinating things going into it, because it's a verbatim open-ended question, is what were going to be the stickiest components that they came back with. After that, we said, based on the trailer you heard, what is your intent to listen to this podcast? And so when we showed the findings, we isolated, of course we have more data, but we isolated those that said they were very likely to listen, and so that we could really show the passion of it.
That's the whole thesis behind this podcast, Trailer Park, is what's the point of a trailer? Hopefully it is to get people interested so that they go and listen to the rest of the show, the intent behind it.
Yep.
And you and I today are going to do some broad strokes. What were the findings? We're not going to get into the specifics, because I'm going to publish episodes, one with Rachel from Nova and one with Peter from Pantheon. We're going to play their trailers. We're going to talk about those trailers, and then we're going to talk about what changes they made or what changes they will make based on the findings of the study. So before we get to those episodes, setting the scene, continuing to set the scene, Jay, what were some of the big takeaways from the survey?
The 2 things that stuck with me the most were, number one, going back to the verbatim question, what do you remember from it? Where they could have mentioned anything. And you're talking about a boatload of comments for 500 people, and 5 major themes emerged. That's it. And those 5 themes drove the way that we presented the findings of the study. So the 5 themes were energy, the name of show, what was the topic, ease of understanding or clarity, and authenticity. They said, it was real, authentic, or natural. So that's the first thing, is those five themes that emerged. And then in the total findings at the end, I think the big headline was that authenticity, of all of those themes I just mentioned, that was the through line. When we looked at the shows, 3 out of the 4 shows, when you looked at kind of this mapping of what people preferred overall, which one they veered towards in the comments, and which one they were leaning towards in intent, it was the one that tended to have more comments towards authentic that won those. So as we pointed out at the beginning of the presentation, there is an asterisk. There's a bit of a caveat, which is, this is based on these 4 shows. Results can vary for your show because it depends on who your host is and what your show is about, and who the voice of the trailer is, for example. But I think authenticity, I mean, as you've pointed out, Arielle, that's something that's been talked about plenty, and that, I don't think that's a recommendation that's not universal.
And also, us as people very much on the inside of this, yeah, sure, we hear it all the time. Authenticity, intimacy. Podcasting is an intimate medium, but we do have to listen to the people that are consuming, and they are the ones who are telling us, yes, it is authentic, it is an intimate medium. So I listen to consumers is what I'm saying.
Yeah, and also on that point, not just saying it,
Right.
but if they bring it up unprompted, if
Right.
we're not, think about the difference between if I put it in, let's say I put an answer set up instead of making it a verbatim. And I said, what comes to mind when you listen to this trailer? Authentic, um, sarcastic, funny, whatever. And I put all these different ones. And they chose authentic, that'd be one thing. It's a whole different thing when they have zero prompting and they use the word authentic to
And
describe
they're not
something.
talking to each other either.
Yeah, right. Yeah, right. Exactly. That means that it's not just something that they perceive, it's something that's important to them, right?
Yeah.
That's the other really important thing to remember. So to me, it's like it's a double thing. It's showing that it's something they remembered and it's something that's important. And you're right. The consumer, there were other things they picked up that I just thought were fascinating. The fact that we got comments, the one that we did AI versus authentic, the fact that, they had no idea that one of them was voiced by AI, but we got several comments on that flagged it, that said this sounded more AI.
Yeah. People are smart.
They are.
We have to give them that. I often, I'll call myself out here, in the way that I host shows, I tend to, in my writing, bold things, leave a lot of white space, do a lot of recaps. When I'm hosting the show, you'll notice that every so often I recap, I signpost, I tell you where we're going next. And I think that's, to an extent, helpful, especially in a medium that is not visual. It's helpful to have as many cues and clues as possible. But also, I should trust that my listeners know where we're going, and also trust me that I will land the plane eventually. So that was a takeaway that I had from this as well, is that people know what they want, and they'll tell you what they want. And if they don't want it, they'll stop listening.
Yeah. Exactly.
So Jay, any other big takeaways that you want to point out before we get to the conversations that we're going to publish with Rachel and Peter?
I just think that I hope that, more globally, podcasters take this as an opportunity for them to think strategically about how they're doing these things. Sometimes we just see these big headlines, or we think we should be doing something because our gut tells us so, or we think we've heard it somewhere, or whatever it might be. Or, you know what? Sometimes, look, everyone gets very busy. And I know podcasters just have a million things on their plate. Now they're being asked to do video. They're trying to get it all together. And it's like, you want me to also sit down and dissect this and think about, how we should be doing this. But I would just think about it, everything from the name of your show to the structure, to the type of host you have, to the trailer you're running, to where you're marketing it, to how you're running a survey. Just always put a strategic mindset to it. It takes a little extra time, but it's so valuable. And most are not going to do that. I promise, you will have a differentiated advantage if you do that.
And that's the whole thing here on this show is, maybe you're listening to this show, dear listener, viewer, if I decide to post the video, and you're here for insights to figure out what to do with your show. Maybe you're here because you want to discover a new podcast because we feature trailers for other podcasts. There's so many different things that you can do for your trailer and for your audience. And there's a lot of advantages to having a trailer, just having that trailer, really just putting something in that place and marking it as a trailer. There is also a lot that you can do to make sure that the branding is cohesive, that you're delivering on the promise that you set out to. The cover art is first. You're going to see the cover art. You're going to see the title. First of all, do those two things match? Then, if somebody hits play on the trailer because it's marked as a trailer and because the title, the episode title is something to do with a trailer, it does not have to be trailer for name of episode. It can be something that signifies to somebody that this is the first thing. Does that trailer match the artwork and the title? Then does the trailer match the tone and the scope and the topics and the music that are being played in the first episode? All of this sort of needs to come together in order to make sure that your listener is getting what they came for. And I believe a big part of it is the trailer, which is why this show exists, which is why we did this research study in the first place. So Jay, thank you for being down to do this, for emailing me in the first place. We had not worked together before this, and I'd always known about you around in conference spaces and whatnot. And I love research. I hope this is obvious to people. find it fascinating. I often find that people misinterpret data in the podcast space and use it. They screenshot whatever they want to screenshot and they say, oh, therefore I must do video, or therefore we're cooked. AI is taking over. But no, you need to look at the methodology. You need to learn how to interpret it. And then most importantly, figure out how it applies to you. Jay, as we head out, what is one piece that you hope everybody takes away with them?
Well, first of all, this was a lot of fun doing this with you too, and hopefully get the chance to work together again too. This was a really fun project. The one thing I'll leave you with is this, because I think what you do with this show is really valuable because it does help people think strategically. But I also want to expand on one other thing that's so valuable about trailers in general is the podcasting industry can often get obsessed with measurement and attribution, right? Yeah, well, if I do a trailer, if I do a clip, will people listen? Will people watch? And even if they don't do it in that moment, or even in a month, or even in 6 months, it doesn't matter. And this is going to sound weird coming from a researcher, but sometimes you don't have to measure everything, and that's totally okay. And be okay with that. One of my favorite marketers, Seth Godin, who wrote the book The Purple Cow and some other great books, used to say, if you're going to do brand marketing, you have to refuse to measure. And some of the best campaigns we've ever seen are brand marketing that we don't have analytics that take us from point A to point B, but they're building a position in our mind over time. They're building awareness, they're building an image, and over time that will lead to usage. And that's a core purpose of the trailer. It's not, will they go listen to my show tomorrow? It's at the point where they're looking for your type of show, you've built an image and you've made your name more aware. So don't ever get discouraged, because there's really high value in doing a podcast trailer.
And even no data is data.
Yeah, even no data is data. I like that.
Well, I'm going to trust my listeners that they know that this is the end of the episode. They know where to submit their podcasts for a potential feature on this show. Basically, what I'm saying is I'm not going to do a full outro, but I will thank you for being here, and I will thank Adam Flaherty for editing and producing this show. And I will remind people once again that we're going to have Rachel and Peter on to play the trailers that they shared and that they created for this study. And I'll leave you with that. Thanks for listening. Happy trails.